All right, everybody, thank you so much for coming here to the Stanislaus River Museum. My name is Martin Blake, and I function as the curator of the museum. And at this point, I'm very proud and honored this evening to be able to present to you an award-winning writer and photographer, Tim Palmer. And Tim has produced over 22 books, environmentally oriented books of all different kinds. And his writing and his photography is truly amazing. I first met Tim myself when he came to California in the late 1970s to coordinate the writing of the Stanislaus River Wild and Scenic River Study to present to Congress in an effort to save the Stanislaus River. And Tim followed, although that was not wholly successful, the Wild and Scenic River Study became a model for other kinds of river studies. And Tim later produced a book on the Stanislaus entitled A Struggle for a River. And Tim is here tonight to talk about his latest books. One is a field guide to California rivers, and the other is California Glaciers. And I thought I just might briefly mention a publicity release by the publisher for Tim, in which it was stated that in this preparation for this elegantly rendered farewell, referring to California Glaciers, award-winning photographer and writer Tim Palmer spent the spring, summer, and autumn of 2010 among California's last glaciers. He climbed and slept in a world of creaking ice and snow, a world sharp with light and cold, photographing the remnants of the mighty forces that for millennia have shaped our mountains and valleys and replenished our lakes, rivers, and streams. Through Palmer's words and photographs, we encounter both the raw power and beauty of these luminous icescapes and the irreversible effects of climate change. This is an elegiac tribute to a fading terrain we should never forget. And Tim has written 22 books, has gotten so many awards, I can barely name them all so well-deserved. His writing is powerful, poignant, personal, and passionate. And at this stage, I would like to introduce to you Mr. Tim Palmer.
Thank you, Marty, for that very kind introduction. You know, people, this is not really the age of books, but this is the first year I have 2 books coming out in 1 year. So I'm kind of doubling my efforts, and just because I still love books and feel that they are the intellectual and artistic capital of our culture. And so I'm keeping it up, and thank you for supporting me in that. And so I'm just thrilled to be here to talk about these 2 new books tonight. Mostly I'm going to talk about the Glacier book, which Marty mentioned. But first I wanted to say just a few things about my field guide to California rivers. I had done this book, the big book of art photos and text called Rivers of California, a few years ago. Thank you. Somebody has seen it. Thank you. And I decided to do this. This was an absolutely amazing experience to go out and get the most beautiful photos I could find, rivers all over California, and write a text intended to both inform and inspire people to take better care of our rivers. But I decided to do just the opposite, to write the handy little field guide so that people could figure out where to go and how to enjoy and appreciate these places more that way. And we have whitewater guides, we have fishing guides, but there's never been really a river guide that dealt with the rivers comprehensively or that took a natural history approach. And so that's what I did with this in California's Field Guide series. And there are chapters on natural history. And then my buddy Bill Avery, who's a PhD biologist at Sac State, did these wonderful drawings. But most of the book then are river by river descriptions with a narrative about the ecology and the fish and conservation, and then just real practical tips on where to go by hiking. That's a little icon of hikers, boating, and fishing. But you know, I can never escape the Stanislaus, of course. And it's just that this is my kind of premier event on this tour. I have about 10 events coming up with the Glacier book. This is the first one. Thank you, Marty. And I had to, I just had to reflect about our river, of course, and all of this that so many of us were a part of. And my book, Stanislaus, The Struggle for a River, was my second book. I just quit a planning career as a land use planner in Pennsylvania and come here to write that book. And I've now written 22 books, and I counted up 10 of them in which I told the Stanislaus story. I can't escape it. If I'm writing about the Sierra Nevada, it's got to be there. If I'm writing about California rivers, it's got to be there. If I'm writing about the history of river conservation in America, you got to tell the story of the Stanislaus. It's just not complete without it. I'm not sure if you all know, but our struggle here was the last dam fight at the epic scale that was lost. Our river was the turning point in water development in America. There have been other dams built, including the North Fork of the Stanislaus, but at that scale of conflict and controversy, nothing else has been built across America. Tuolumne was next, we beat that. American was next, we beat that. On and on. Yeah. So in that sense, the legacy of all this was incredibly poignant and meaningful and grand, if you could say that. And hey, you're welcome. Well, thank all of you. And this is just the field guide, basically, on where to go and interpretive dialogue. But I just wanted to read you one paragraph from this before I switch to the Glacier book, and that is in the Stanislaus section of this. And there it is, Mother Rapid, And let me see where that. Oh, here we go. So, I said I have a little narrative about each river at the beginning, and this is at the end of that narrative, I say. Before 1980, the Stanislaus from Camp 9 to Parrots Ferry was the most popular paddling river in the West, with 9 miles of stellar rapids, idyllic campsites, spectacular scenery, archaeological sites, and tributaries such as Rose Creek with waterfalls and unmatched swimming holes. This was the deepest limestone canyon on the West Coast, but the 625-foot-tall new Melones Dam was planned in the 1960s. Whitewater paddler and biologist Jerry Merrill founded Friends of the River in 1973 in an effort to halt the dam, but after the most intense effort ever to save a river, the reservoir was filled in 1980. Though the Wild River was flooded, this was the last dam fight at the epic scale in America that was lost. So that's how I covered it in my latest book. And what I'd like to do now is switch to the Glacier subject, which is what I'm going to talk about most tonight. And in a sense, I got to this through the river also. I had finished Rivers of California, and you can't help but then think about where the rivers come from. And of course, that's, for the most part, the mountains of California. And in the mountains of California, we have glaciers. A lot of people don't realize California has glaciers. Probably the most common response I get for the last several years when I was working on this book is, you mean there are glaciers in California? Where? And there are about 130 of them across our state. It all, of course, depends on how you define it, and there are different numbers, but that's probably the best count we have. And so within that whole context of mountains, these glaciers are amazing features, and it turns out they're disappearing. So much as I found the Stanislaus when I was doing an earlier book called Endangered Rivers in the Conservation Movement, about rivers that were disappearing all over our country because of dams that were still being built. Here's another subject. Here's another landscape that was disappearing. You might say in front of our eyes, it's actually invisible to us because they're in such remote, hidden places. But our California glacial landscape is being lost as well, owing to global warming. So somehow the poignancy of all this just really grabbed me, and I said, it'd be great to do a book just about that. Because in a sense, this was the last chance to see this landscape and to record what it really is. And so I set to work on this, and it was just an amazing project. You know, I had to figure out where the glaciers were, and then I had to figure out how to get there. And of course, they're amazingly important, not just because glaciers historically shaped the landscape that we now know in places like Yosemite Valley, but to provide water to our rivers. Once all the snowmelt is gone, like now, it's just the glacial streams that keep running and keep rivers like the Upper Tuolumne and others in water late in the season like this. And they're melting away to nothing because of global warming. You've all heard the global warming story. I tell that in here. I don't have to really reiterate the numbers, I think, for you here, but the glaciers are disappearing very rapidly, except for Mount Shasta. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But they're going fast, and so I wanted to get there and get the photos before they were gone. And in a way, this was a really difficult subject for a couple of reasons. One is that just this fact that I'm spending a whole summer exploring places that were about to disappear. And so there's something very melancholy about that, you know, and something very tragic about that. And yet I approached this project with just incredible gusto. You know, I had the opportunity to go see these places, which I had, you know, I'd seen some of them, but not nearly all. And I just ended up being really impassioned and motivated by these amazing places, you know, and by the struggle it took to get there and see them and photograph them. That was the second hard part. I had to get really good photos of California's glaciers. I didn't only have to get there, but I had to be there first thing in the morning because they all faced east and north. And so it's morning sunlight that hits them. By afternoon, you know, they're long in shadow. And so to get that wonderful golden light on these glaciers, I had to be there when the sun first hit them. And I ended up determining after one night that I had 50 minutes from the very first light when I could just barely see the ground enough to walk, 50 minutes from then until when the first direct rays of sunlight hit the peaks where the glaciers were. So I'd take my camping gear. I had to camp as high as possible. I couldn't just go up there, you know, and take a picture at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I had to be there at 5:30 or 6 in the morning. So I'd camp as high as I possibly could, and then get up before daylight and head up, sprint up in the 50 minutes I had to get to where I wanted to be to get that shot. And so I was going to try to show you one of my, here it's a little hard to see here. I think I have a slide of this coming up. There's my tent, you know. It was rough camping to get as high as I couldn't possibly camp any higher than this. There was just no place. In fact, one of the campsites I had, I was moving rocks about the size of this box to get a place where I could sleep, and until I moved one too many and there was running water underneath me. So I had to actually put rocks back to sleep on so I wouldn't be sleeping in water. And this wasn't for everyone. You know, I did most of these trips alone because, of course, who would want to go? Anne went with me for the first 3 trips, which were even harder because they were ski trips. In the month of May, I wanted to see these glaciers as they look in the winter, as they looked when they were healthy and being formed. And so we skied into 3 of the glaciers, and those were hard trips too. But most of them I did alone because who would want to do that? Who would want to sleep there? Anyhow, that's kind of the gist of what I did, and I thought I might now read to you just a little bit from the introduction of the book, and then show you pictures of glaciers all over our state. So let me do that. And then I'd be glad to take questions from you at any time, too. Let me read just a page here first. In the spring of 2010, I set out for the glaciers of California. I wanted to see them before they were gone. I wanted to climb on the glacier's steep slopes to feel the crunch of their snow underfoot, to drink from crystalline streams cutting their icy surfaces, to sleep at their rocky windswept edges, and to photograph their evanescent beauty so others might know what was there. It proved to be one of the most remarkable summers of my life. Many people are unaware that glaciers even exist in California. That's no surprise, considering that these small gems of frozen water lie at extremely high elevations, cling to frighteningly slanted slopes, nestle into chilled northern recesses of our wildest haunts beyond roads and trails, and reside where the weather constantly threatens mortal comfort, if not survival. But they're there. They're part of California. They're important, and they're disappearing as the climate changes. Reaching them was a challenge, but during my spring through autumn quest, I visited 20 or so in their high mountain amphitheaters. I was irrepressibly drawn to scenes of lovely elegance and to others of harshest grandeur. I watched nature's workings in phenomena that I never expect to witness again, and also in Earth's everyday chores. One moment, the frightening crush of a 5-foot boulder from a high cliff to ice surface with a thunderous thud. The next moment, the ongoing drip of an icicle, a common yet revealing transformation of water from one form to another. The glaciers are brilliant, white with drifts of snow, blue with unfrozen depths of ice, golden in the first light of sunrise, glistening with glassy refrozen veneers at the end of each day, and nearly black, but vaguely gleaming and mysterious in their creakings at night beneath the stars. Glaciers and their greater context, the earth, water, life, sky, and weather around them, caught my eyes and propelled me onward with my camera in hand. So well, thank you. Thank you. I want to show you pictures now. Any comments, though, before I start that? Questions? Yeah, please.
Did you research historic photographs and try and emulate them?
I did, and I have some of those in the book. The section where I deal with the glaciers disappearing and global warming and so forth, I definitely did that. I carried these photos around in my pocket, and when I got there, I'd unfold them, and then I'd go looking for landmarks so I could match, repeat photography, You can't see them from there, but when you get the book, you can. See, here is the Lyell and McClure Glacier. This one is Darwin and Mendel down in the south, near the Palisades. The one that most graphically shows is Dana. You all know Mount Dana from Tuolumne Meadows. It's just that rounded hump at the head of the meadows that it was unglaciated. But if you go to the top and look down the other side, or if you walk around from Tioga Lake and go up the creek there, the whole eastern half of Mount Dana is gone because glaciers took it away. And that's what you see. Pardon me? Well, they were mostly USGS and early photographic explorers. This one is G.K. Gilbert, 1903. And Gilbert, I forget I think he was on a government survey of some kind. But that's what he saw. See, can you tell from there, this is all ice back here, and that's this area here. The glacier now is just here, and this couloir, which people were skiing when I was there. It was phenomenal, One gal at the top said, it's too steep, I can't stand to look at it, you just gotta ski. So she was a better skier than me. Anyway, so I did look at the historic things that way. But and they're way smaller, but the more important aspect of that is that they're way thinner, and we don't know how thick they are, because we don't know how thick the ice is there. So does anyone know Greg Stock, the geologist for Yosemite? Yeah, a number of people do. This is another Stanislaus story. I just got to tell you this before I start the slides. I heard from my buddy Jack Laws, John Muir Laws, he does those wonderful guidebooks. Jack said, there's this guy, the Yosemite geologist, who's doing research on the glaciers in Yosemite. And I said, great. So I looked him up and I called him on the phone and I got this guy and I said, is this Greg? Yeah. And I said, this is Tim Palmer. Greg, I'm a writer and a photographer. And he said, Tim Palmer? He said, are you the guy who wrote the book about the Stanislaus? And I said, yeah. And he said, I just got to tell you, that book changed my life. When he was in grade school, kids wore buttons to school that said, fill the dam. He said, I remember I went home and asked my dad, what's this all about? This sounds crazy. What's this all about? And then when he was in high school, he found my book in the high school library and read it. And he said that showed him that there was a whole lot more to nature and to what you could do and what needed to be done. And I decided to be a natural scientist. I ended up being a geologist, and here I am. And he said, Tim, I've got a survey expedition in September. You want to come? So I went, and we became good friends. And his picture's in the book doing his survey. Anyway, the thickness, that's what made me think of this. He's measuring how much thickness is being lost per year. So we know from those photos that they're shrinking, left to right, north to south, they're shrinking. What we don't know is how much the thickness is shrinking. And so theoretically, picture a glacier that shrinks a little on the edges every year, but the thickness is going on until theoretically you could have a glacier only 1 foot thick, and the next year the whole thing would be gone. And part of that scenario is in fact what's happening. So they're actually disappearing way faster than it appears from these photos that show the area shrinkage. Other questions? That was great. Yes?
So you mentioned maybe 130 or so, depending on how you define it.
Yeah.
Can I get into that a little bit?
Yeah. John Muir, without the advantage of airplanes or anything like that, said there are about 70 glaciers in the Sierra, which is an amazingly accurate figure. If you want to define it by sizable ice masses. A USGS crew surveyed every permanent ice patch they could find back in the 70s. The report wasn't published till the 90s. But they found something like 400. I've got the numbers in here. And so that included a lot of even very, very minor pieces that aren't moved. Glaciers are typically defined by a permanent ice mass that's migrating slowly downhill. And then a geographer at Portland State, where they have a glacier research center, took all of those numbers and reanalyzed them just a couple of years ago to see every mass greater than 2 acres that seemed to have enough mass to cause it to migrate downhill, and they compared their size to others worldwide known to be doing that. And he came up with 130. And so that's probably the most accurate, kind of scientific estimate. When you're out there in the field, it's pretty hard to judge whether it's a permanent ice mass because you got snow on top, and whether it is moving because, of course, you got to be like Greg Stock and be measuring it with GPS systems and all that to really know. My rule of thumb was to look for a bergschrund. Do you know what a bergschrund is? It's the gap. The glacier forms against the mountain, typically on the lee side of a windy slope where cornices build up and the snow just piles up really deep. And that's where they are. And in the summer, after it quits snowing, in the summer, that glacier creeps downhill and opens up a gap against the rocks at its very top end. It separates from the mountain. That separation, it's a big cavity, is called a bergschrund. So I'll show you pictures of them. I look, basically my rule of thumb was if there's a bergschrund there, it's probably a glacier because it indicates that it's slid downhill through the summer. So that's kind of when I went on photograph, am I going to call this a glacier? That's usually what I used. Enough on that? Other questions? Okay, let's look at pictures here. Basically, this is it's just kind of a travel log north to south through the state to show you what there is for glaciers. The Trinity Alps in the north used to have a lot of glaciers. There are 2 tiny ones left. This is Thompson Peak. I don't know if you any know the Trinity River Basin, North Fork of the Trinity, Grizzly Creek, up to the headwaters of it, this incredible waterfall, which is literally the outfit of a lake here that stretches way back to this background. And the glacier is right up here. There's the Bergschrund. Can you see that crack? Here it is up close. I climbed up early that morning. Thompson Peak, and just to the north of that, there's another peak, and there's this tiny little residual glacier there. But that's pretty much it in the coastal range south of the Olympic Mountains in Washington. The rest have melted away, and here you can kind of see the situation. This is from a jetliner when I was flying from Portland to San Francisco at 30,000 feet. You know, here, these are the two little glaciers we're talking about right there. In this landscape that was all once heavily glaciated, you know, it's melted away, and those two little pieces are all that's left there.
Hey, Tim, is that the Siskiyous? Or
Yes.
Siskiyous?
Yes, Siskiyous, yeah. Yeah, the kind of the southern end of what you might think of as the Marble Mountains. But the Siskiyous has the Greater Range complex, or the Klamath Mountains, many people call the whole complex of different mountain ranges up there.
Are they typically north facing?
Yeah, almost always north and east facing. Yeah, rarely west. I would say never west in California. West facing glaciers begin to appear in Oregon on Mount Hood and so forth, but they're all melted away down here. So then comes Mount Hood. And, you know, my first view of anything in California were the glaciers on Mount Shasta. And I was working at Crater Lake for the National Park Service as a college student, as a laborer for the Park Service, and I hitchhiked every weekend to see the country. And the first weekend I caught a ride south, and as I came across the border, bam, there was Shasta, that amazing monolith that you see when you top the pass coming south from the Siskiyou Mountains. And the white snow on that in the middle of summer when it was 95 degrees out seemed absolutely impossible. But it was Shasta, of course. Shasta has the only big glaciers we have left. This is the east side of Shasta. This is the Hotlam Glacier, which is really the most featured and interesting and dynamic and largest of the Shasta glaciers. This is the Winton Glacier here. This is just a snowfield that does not have ice in it. And there are others. There are 10 glaciers on Mount Shasta. And Shasta is a very interesting case. They're some of the only glaciers, probably the only ones in the continental US, and some of very few glaciers worldwide that are actually getting bigger and thicker. And the reason is that Shasta is north enough and high enough that it's still getting the additional precip which global warming is bringing us from the oceans warming up. It's still getting it as snow instead of rain. Where our mountains in the Sierra, you know, that's now too warm for that advantage. Shasta, however, will likely turn around, the glaciologists feel, within the next 50 years. And then they will begin to recede rapidly as well. So I said I did all these trips, most of them by myself. Shasta was the exception. I went up to the base of the Hotlam here alone and just crawled around on these hard ice surfaces and whatnot quite safely. But I wanted to, can we focus that, Annie? I wanted to get up higher into the real ice fields up in here. And that's, you don't want to do that alone. And so I had friends that met me there, but here's just a detail further down on these rocks that appear to be floating. You know, they're on the ice. The rocks fall onto the ice when the glacier's high on the mountain with cliffs surrounding it. Rocks constantly fall down and landslides land on the ice. The ice is migrating downhill. It might have taken, these rocks might have landed on the glacier 100 or 200 years ago, when it was way up on the mountain. It slowly drifts downhill. I'm down at the very toe of the glacier now. They have ridden the glacier, a free ride, down 2,000 feet down through the last century or two. And of course, every day in the summer, that snow melts and then it refreezes at night. The rocks settle down a little lower, a little lower. they seem to just be floating on water there, and they are in a sense, they're floating on frozen water. Shasta has great crevasses, these amazing, all these incredible ice features. To get to the upper part, though, I didn't want to do that alone, so my two friends, Nettie Perdue and Jeff Pfluger, husband and wife team here, joined me. We hiked up the snowfields and camped right here on this ridge where we were overlooking these amazing, this amazing complexity of the Hotlam Glacier. And then the next day we roped up. They teach glacier climbing and have done all of this stuff in Alaska and everywhere. And so they were my safety experts and my guides, really, for this part of the trip as we went out into these amazing complexes of, we call these seracs. Seracs are these big ice forms that pile up because the ice is moving. But as it moves, it encounters all kinds of resistance from the underlying topography. Big boulders, cliffs, drop-offs. And so it breaks, and then it recongeals and collides, and you have all this chaos that forms. Just amazing. So you don't want to be here alone because things can go wrong, and so you're tied into a rope line with your friends. Here's Nettie, this amazing site that we were able to get to. And here are these just massive, deep, we would throw snowballs into these things, and they just seconds would go by, and then we'd hear it splash in water way down at the bottom of this hole, or hundreds of feet down probably. We're roped up in case something terribly goes wrong, like a cave in here. And then theoretically, Jeff and I would dig our ice axes into the snow and stop her fall, because she's tied in, and then pull her back up. So Shasta is where you still really have these incredible glacier features. And there's Jeff up on top of this big ice form. Then we come into the Sierra Nevada, and there are only a few places you can actually see glaciers from the roads in California. This is one, I think you've probably all seen this. It's just to the north of Bridgeport. Looking at Matterhorn Peak, Sawtooth Ridge. These are glaciers up in here. These high areas under the peak there that you see right from the highway. And here it is up close. Long, steep climb to get up there. But then this incredible landscape at sunrise, as I described. This was after my sprint, my 50-minute sprint uphill. This is Sawtooth Ridge, Dragtooth Peak to the north of Matterhorn. This is almost the northernmost glacier in the Sierra Nevada.
Hey, Tim.
Yeah?
Did you read Dharma Bums before you went up?
I read it years ago,
Oh,
yes.
okay.
Yeah. I did take my
That would be part of it.
sleeping bag.
There you go.
Jack Kerouac forgot his sleeping bag in Dharma Bums at Matterhorn Peak.
Tim, if you could always repeat questions for the camera, that'd be great.
Okay. So this is a shot again from a jetliner. There's no current glacier here, but this really shows dramatically the glacier moraines. There was a glacier that filled this area, Green Creek on the east side, south of Mona Lake. The glacier came the whole way down here and pushed up these lateral moraines, which are these ridge lines here, as it pushed gravel aside and carried rocks from the top and deposited them. When it melded, it forms these big moraines. You can just see it so graphically there. Here's Mount Conness. Many of you know Conness? Been up it. It's amazing, one of the highest peaks in northern Yosemite. This is when Ann and I skied there in May. And it was all covered with snow. Here it is late in the summer when all that was left is the glacier. You can see that dramatic difference. And here's Dana. The Mount Dana is up here. This is from Tioga Lake. We hiked just basically straight north into this basin. This lake is just melting out. This is water on top of ice is what gives it that amazing color, perfectly matching Ann's sweater. And this is the glacier here, still covered with a lot of snow. This is what those people were skiing. And So that was it in May when it was still in pretty much winter garb. Here it is late in the summer. You can see that this is the ice here and the couloir here. That's all that's left. The historic picture in the book I pointed to showed ice the whole way through this amphitheater here.
What year was all this?
I took the pictures in 2010, which was a big snow year. So one of the rare ones in recent years. So when Ann and I were there in May, there was still a lot of snow. But that was pretty much, even in big snow years, it's pretty much all melted out by September, which is when I went back to take the pictures of just the ice. And then the Gibbs Glacier, this is a tiny little pocket glacier. Many may not even consider it a glacier at all, but I did because I think there's permanent ice there. And even though it's probably not moving, it was a glacier, and the same ice is still there. So I counted it. And Mount Dana's here, Mount Gibbs is there. I'm right in the saddle looking straight east at Mono Lake. And here's the upper edge of the glacier. And here it is from around the side, looking down at it. These crevasses, that's another reason I call it a glacier. It still has got the ability to produce major crevasses like that. And then this has even more ice in it, this further south, but more north-facing slope. And then some people do. Some people call them glacierettes, these remnants. Yeah, I call them remnant glaciers. Then the two big glaciers in Yosemite are McClure and Lyell. Lyell's the highest peak in Yosemite. It's the biggest glacier, the second largest glacier in the Sierra Nevada. And this is Mount Lyell, this glacier here. The McClure Glacier's further over to the right. That was my campsite there. Here again, looking up at this amazing feature. Here's Greg, the geologist from Yosemite, with his equipment. He had two other people with him on this group. Do any of you ever see Yosemite Notes? It's a field notes. Yeah, the Steve Bumgardner, who produces that, was on our trip and actually did an episode based on our trip. And anyway, there's Greg, and his measurements of Lyell, which is the biggest glacier here, showed that it's not moving perceptibly anymore at all, but the McClure Glacier right next to it is. And here we are on McClure. This is Josh Hellig, who's a notorious climber. He was our safety expert. And this is Steve Bumgardner here doing the filming. They're actually marking these places that Steve was measuring. And here's the top of Lyell, and you can see these incredible, do you all know what sun cups are? Late, just owing to the minute disconformities of the snowpack, parts melt faster than others, so you get these sun cups late in the year, little divots in the snow that eventually get deep enough that they make skiing impossible. Those continue to get to be these incredible peaked formations. There they are. And these are 3 and 4 feet deep. So the only way to travel is in crampons, stepping in these ridge holes like this. And but it might be 4 feet down there. You could get seriously injured just walking across the surface of the glacier here. There's Josh and the biggest crevasse on Mount McClure. One of the great quotes from John Muir is who I covered John Muir in this book too, because John Muir's first article was about glaciers. And he came to fame by discovering and announcing to the world that there are actually living glaciers in the Sierra Nevada. Nobody thought there were. And I reflected on this because I'm kind of following in his footsteps along the way here. But yet my fate as a reporter was so different from his, where he got to announce there were living glaciers to a world that was fascinated and eager to hear that. My fate was to document these glaciers in their final years or decades with news that nobody wanted to hear. But at any rate, John Muir went into one of those glaciers and wrote about his experience, which is wonderful, and I quote it in my book. Here's Greg at the top of the McClure Glacier, where we found this incredible bergschrund. And it was solid enough. These are phenomenally unstable places because any of this can cave in at any time. And the glacier all year has been plucking rocks by freeze-thaw action off this head wall. And so they land here, and then this melts, and then the rock falls, and some of them are huge. So it's a very dangerous place to be normally. So you want to be very careful when you're there. And in fact, the three of them went into a cave that is down here. This is just an amazing feature. Here they are getting ready to go into this cave. And this was in the afternoon. I prefer to be there in the morning before the snow begins to melt. And they all roped down into this cave and said, "Hey, Tim, do you want to come?" And I said, "No, I don't think so." I just didn't like the idea of all four of us being in there at once. But here they're getting ready this is Steve filming and Josh. And we had a good time.
How thick is the ice in these areas? Do you have any idea?
Well, again, that's what nobody knows because there's no real good way to measure it. But the bergschrund, just from what we could see here, I mean, I was looking at a 40-foot thickness right there. That probably gets thinner very quickly as you run down the slope from it. Greg thinks that the thickness of McClure and Lyle could be as thin as tens of feet at this point. And it's losing about a foot or so of thickness per year. So do the math.
Greg took sounding equipment up there this year.
He did. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that was one of his plans.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, to try to do echolocation, sonar basically. Interesting. This is a frozen head wall there at the bergschrund. This is ice, but it was just frozen like a frozen waterfall. This is the very bottom of McClure where just these rococo patterns of freeze. Every day it thaws and drips. Every night it freezes into these amazing patterns and gargoyles and everything. And then here's the cave that we went into, and this is probably 5 feet high at the opening, and we crawled back, and I squirmed back as far as I could, and it's just this glassy black surface of smooth ice, just like a wet mirror on the top. And there's Steve. Could you focus that, Annie? Yeah, there we go. So as I start one of the chapters in the book, I wanted to explore these glaciers. I never thought I would be inside them, but there I was. Here's a little meltwater pool with reflections at the bottom of McClure and these big slabs of snow that are peeling off. And then we're around the east side at Banner and Ritter Peaks, these landmarks of the Central Sierra. At Thousand Island Lake, many of you have probably seen it from the Pacific Crest Trail. Glaciers here under these peaks, you know, and all these spots. There's a bergschrund up there, over here. And here the other side with Banner and Ritter looking from the south. And this is the headwaters of Shadow Creek, but these glacier sources of this water up in places like that. And just a photo I used to illustrate the streams and how important the source, these glaciers are as the source of water. There's life up there. You know, here's the marmot, which of course loves the high country and the snowy edge. And I don't have a good picture, but pikas, you know, require high elevation habitat. And as the climate warms, they keep moving upslope. 30% of their habitat of just 50 years ago is now gone. These are the minarets. And glacier, this is with a lot of snow in May, but all these pockets here up against the peaks have glaciers under the snowfall there. Later in the season, this is the middle of the night with only moonlight here. This is like a 5-second exposure that I took when I got up at 2 o'clock in the morning. You know, the stars are moving while the lens is open here. But just, I mentioned in my intro, just that eerie blackness and the creakings of the glaciers at night. I definitely felt it there. There's that campsite, kind of a typical scene. Mount Dade the Dade Glacier here, Mount Mills further over here, Abbott and Mills. And here's the Dade Glacier up close with its bergschrund here, which I later climbed up to but not into. With that sunrise light, there it is with a telephoto lens. So there you can see the glacier is slumped, broken away right here and slumped down probably 10 feet that summer. There I am right at the bergschrund looking at that upper collar of snow and the peak of Mount Dade summit above it. Amazing snow formations up there. This is, the melt out pattern is, it creates all these very strange formations. Again, the top of that glacier, here's Mount Mills and this little remnant glacier in this couloir where this is all ice and remnant glacier surface in there. Mount Humphrey's another one of the few you can see from the road. Just as you approach Bishop, just north of Bishop, you look at Humphreys is the highest, it's the highest peak that far north in the Sierra. You see it right from the highway. This is a big telephoto lens from the Buttermilks off the road, but its glacier comes down this couloir back in here and then spills out into this area. And here's the Mathis Glacier. You know, John Muir was ridiculed by geologists of his day who thought Yosemite was formed simply by seismic action, and John Muir maintained it was formed by glaciers. And he was later vindicated by a glaciologist, Francois Mathis. And so who kind of did the big path-breaking glacial study of Yosemite. And so this glacier is named the Mathis Glacier. This is way south of Yosemite. This is up west of Bishop. But this is the Mathis Glacier, and unfortunately it's just shrinking away to almost nothing now. This is all the moraine I mentioned. After hiking off trail, you just climb rock to rock to rock to rock the whole way up until you get to the ice up in here. These amazing plants pioneering the surface just abandoned by the glaciers and the snowfields. This is broadleaf buckwheat at Mount Dana. And just tons of that. It does really well in these pioneering areas. And then here we are near, I was hiking up to this divide, the Lamarck Divide, west of Bishop, to look at the Mendel and Darwin glaciers, which are here. This is the Darwin Glacier, this is the Mendel Glacier. And buddy, do any of you know James Wilson of Wilson's Eastside Sports in Bishop? He's a great Eastern Sierra aficionado, and he would talk about when this was just one of the greatest ice climbs in the Sierra, and says that now it's just this rock-covered slush pile. It's melting away so quickly. This is the Thompson Glacier. We're getting near the southernmost glaciers now, toward the Palisades in the Sierra, but here you can still see the ice mass here and the bergschrund at the top. And across this divide is the Gilbert Glacier, which is on just to the left of the other picture. Again, it's melting away now, just mostly covered with rock. There's ice under all this rock. And once all of the ice is melted away, there will still be ice under a lot of that rock for many, many years because it's insulated being under the rock. They call them rock glaciers. And they will ultimately end up being the last glaciers left in the Sierra, still an important source of water. And then the Palisades group, the southernmost glaciers. This is from, have you ever been to Westgard Pass and the big overlook as you go to the bristlecone pines? If you go to the Methuselah Grove of the bristlecones, there's a pullout where you overlook the Palisades here. It's one of the most grand views of the Sierra anywhere. But here we are. This is Mount Sill. This is the North Palisade, Thunderbolt Peak, Glacier Divide, Norman Clyde, the Middle Palisade. So these are this is the Middle Palisade Glacier. This is the North Palisade Glacier complex up here. The rest is snow because this is early in the year. Temple Crag is this incredible formation here. And here's right on the Middle Palisade Glacier. And again, some of the pioneering plants here, this yellow composite, right almost at the edge of the ice. And they're just some of the detail formations. Middle Powell, it's Bergschrund caving in there, filling in the gap even in the summer because this cornice keeps calving off into it. Then here's the North Powell. This is North Palisade, Thunderbolt Peak. Ann and I had hopes of skiing on the North Palisade Glacier in May, which is all this up in here. We never made it. It was just the most incredibly difficult trip. We thought we'd be on skis soon after we started off the trailhead, but there was much more melt out, so we had to carry all of our heavy ski gear along with everything else we carried for 4 days. And then when we did get to snow, it was seriously rotted out and post-holing and all of that. We made it only to here, but I was able, a campsite below here, I was able to climb up though to get this incredible view across the canyon to the Palisades at sunrise there. When it still looked pretty much in its winter garb, there's still heavy snow in the winter. Then I went back at the very end of my experience, the last glacier I photographed here, to in late September. And this is the glacier here. I climbed up the moraine to its east and camped right here. And the next morning, I intended to walk down this rock slope to the edge of the lake and then around the lake to the glacier and then put my crampons on and hike up to the top of the glacier to its Bergschrund here. This is the U-Notch, famous route for climbers going to the summit of the North Powell. As it turned out, just the lay of the land ended up taking me in just the tippiness of rocks, which was pretty severe, took me down into this area. And I was really glad because as I kind of hoisted myself up onto one of these big boulders down here at the bottom and looked back, all of what I thought was just a boulder field was actually ice with boulders on top. And about a 20-foot head wall of ice dropping into the lake and just kind of calving boulders off into the water. So I was glad not to be there. But I got to here and then climbed up. And this was that, focus. Here's a person here. See this climber? And so this is a telephoto lens of what we just saw. But so you just step rock to rock to rock until you get to the ice. And these rocks being deposited only 10,000 years ago are still very unstable. A lot of them tip and move. So I had to being there alone, I had to be especially careful not to get caught. And then here's that ice wall I was talking about at the lake. This is another incredible feature. This is called a table rock. This rock probably fell onto the glacier when the glacier was way up here. And it rode the ice downhill as I described before. And repeatedly over the decades and perhaps a couple of hundred years, it would sit there insulating, shading the ice underneath it. And so the ice away from it would melt away in the sunlight. The ice directly underneath would stay intact. So you had this incredible juxtaposition of the huge and the heavy on top of the thin and the ephemeral, until eventually it would melt away enough that it would, of course, crash down to the lower level and then continue its route on that ice until the same process repeated itself again and again and again. So in effect, you can measure the thinning of the glacier from this rock down to the ambient level here of the ice, not since it landed at that point. Of course, this happens repeatedly the whole way down, though. And I saw rocks not huge like this. This is probably 20 feet across. But rocks 3 feet across would be tumbling off these pedestals, even as I was there. This is, again, up higher, but this shows my route up into the U-Notch for my final trip. And then here I am at this final Bergschrund at the North Powell. And then incredible moonset there at the glacier crest there, just north of Mount Norman Clyde.
Tim, has there been any estimates on how much the Palisades glaciers have shrunk in the last few decades?
No.
Have a handle on that?
I have not seen anything on that, and Greg didn't really know of studies on that either. There's been remarkable little study like what he has done in Yosemite. Can we have the lights back on, Marty? So I was going to read to just to end here. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Just a real quick one here. My final climb up the North Powell. You want to shut that fan off? And just the last paragraph or two here. I turned and looked back down the North Palisade Glacier, and I thought about the years required for the ice to move from top to bottom. Given today's rate of warming, it's doubtful the ice at the Bergschrund will last long enough to endure the glacier's long downhill slide to the lake. The glacier will likely be gone before the ice where I stood can get to the bottom. Whatever will take the North Palisade Glacier's place will be beautiful as well. The fell fields and tumult of rock, the meadows evolving with a pileup of wind-blown dust, the streams that may gradually surface when the underground cavities fill with sediment. Even the shape of the mountains will be altered in the endless cycles of change. But I was grateful to be there in the autumn of 2010, when I could still stand on the ice and snow of a glacier. So thank you so much. You know, the one final comment here, being consumed by this question of loss had, as I said, my approach was to just tackle this thing with gusto, and I really enjoyed myself. It was just amazing to see all of this. But it also, and especially being there in the autumn, when you're dealing with all those autumn issues, the days getting shorter and the sunlight more faint and the leaves falling and all of those things, just really took me back to the fundamental questions about life and time and living for the moment. And by being so consumed by this issue of something disappearing, of course, all our lives are moving on as well. And it just reinforced for me that lesson that I think we get in many ways when friends pass away or family members die and just we all get old, as we're all doing. This just the preciousness of the moment is what I really came out of this feeling the strongest. Not the loss that we have, but just how precious the moment is and how vibrant and vital life can be. And so I just came with a renewed determination to embrace all of that for the rest of my life. Thank you for joining me. I'd love to hear what else any of you have to say. Questions? Yeah. Ron.
Tim, the predominant sense would be visual, but I'm curious as to what you heard and smelled when you were up there in the bowels of the glacier. The smell you get is just that. Ann and I got it today. We went hiking up above Pinecrest into the South Fork Stanislaus, all the granite above, if you've been above Pinecrest Reservoir. It's wonderful. But in the morning, we have there's snow on the ground up there now, and you get that damp, cold, kind of autumn smell with a little bit of dirt and ice and just a lot of humidity, but cold. So there was sort of that kind of smell. I can't really tell you what it was, but it was just that it's kind of an autumn wet dampness. And the sounds, there are a lot of sounds because things are melting all the time. There's water dripping. There's water running under the big glaciers. North Powell had water running under it. The Shasta glaciers had water. You could stand there and listen to it kind of gurgling in the rocks below. The most incredible thing was on Shasta. The day before my friends showed up, I was just kind of touring the lower end of the glacier, which I could do safely. And here's this huge head wall, 100 feet high, next to the glacier, and a boulder as big as this table fell off of it. And I heard it coming. It was 200 yards from me. I was not in danger, but I could hear the kind of the crack of it breaking loose, and so I could actually see it fall into space, and it hit the ice with just this enormous thud, just onto the ice absorbed most of the sound, but it was still this massive thing just crashing down on the ice. A sound I had never heard before, never will again. The rock dust comes from the stones pushing stones against stones. It's not the ice grating against the stones. That's not abrasive enough. But the ice pushes, if there's ice here and these are rocks, it pushes these rocks like this, and they grate against each other. And it plucks rocks from the bottom. The ice will catch the edge of a rock and turn it over. Huge, 10-foot boulders. It'll start rolling them underneath it. All that just grinds. And that's what produces the milky water you see in big glaciers, Alaska and all that. Just didn't see it here. Even on Shasta, below the Hutlam Glacier, there was just a tiny glacier stream coming out. And it was silty. It didn't have that gray look, but it was silty just from churning of so much dirt and material under it. You definitely see that in big glaciers. Go to Alaska, and the rivers look like gray paint. There's just so much glacier dust in them. Yeah.
My understanding is that the Sierra glaciers are from the Little Ice Age.
That's right.
Not from the last great
That's right.
glaciers. Is that true?
Yeah, the continental glaciers never came here because they didn't make it this far south and our mountain ranges blocked them. But during the continental glacial era, which ended 10,000 years ago, the mountain glaciers were immense. We had basically 200 miles of glacier across the Sierra crest. That all melted away to nothing, they think. Although some glaciologists are now reconsidering that and saying that maybe they didn't, but most of it did. And then the Little Ice Age was in basically the early 1800s, a cool climate shift for about a century. Glaciers reformed, and it's now the remnants of those that are melting away today.
I have a question in regards to some of the roof pendants, like up at Dana, where you have metamorphic rocks versus maybe down further in the south where you might have more granitics. Are you familiar with any studies of rates of melt that might differ between metamorphics versus granitics, different rock types?
No, I haven't seen anything like that. And a lot of those metamorphics are darker, and of course the volcanic rocks, igneous volcanic rocks, are way darker. So they would attract more heat, but of course the rocks got to show before that happens. So when the glaciers are still there, everything is covered.
I'm just wondering, from reflection from rocks that might.
Yeah. Well, like at the Bergschen splits, and then sun does hit the rock at the head wall and warms them. So there might be some of that. Is that it? It's been terrific to be here and honor the books are on the table. They're about half price. Almost all my stuff is about half price. Love to sell you a book, but feel free to browse either way. And it's just great to see old friends and meet new friends, and I'm so glad to be here.
I would just like to thank Jim Palmer for one of the most amazing, comprehensive, compelling, important presentations that I've ever heard. And I'd also like to acknowledge everyone in this audience, some of the greatest writers, photographers, documentarians, environmental activists, social activists that California has ever seen. And I'm honored to be in everyone's presence.
Me too.
Thank you all so much.
Well said.